The sun hung low over the horizon, burning the edges of the prairie with a soft, golden haze. Alma sat behind the worn stone steps of the little church, the wind tugging gently at her veil. Her pristine wedding gown was no longer pure. Dirt and dust clung to the hem, tears mingling with the soil beneath her fingertips. She pressed her hands against her face, the weight of humiliation pressing down heavier than any physical burden she had ever carried. The streets of the small western town beyond the church echoed faintly with the sounds of life moving on without her. Horses clattered on wooden planks, wagon wheels creaked over cobblestones, and the faint laughter of townsfolk drifted across the air, oblivious to the young bride who had been cast aside. Alma's chest tightened with every muffled sound, every reminder that she had been left to face the day alone, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to celebrate her. Her mind replayed the morning in fragments, the whispered excuses, the cold shoulders, the deliberate avoidance. Invitations rescinded without a word, messages ignored. She had arrived, full of hope, only to discover that her family and the man she had expected to marry had all but erased her from the day. The betrayal carved a hollow ache through her heart, one that seemed impossible to soothe. Alma drew her knees closer, wrapping the delicate lace of her gown around her trembling body. The fabric offered little comfort. It was a mockery now, a reminder of promises broken and dreams shattered. Her gaze fell upon the dusty path leading away from the church, a road she had no intention of following. There was nowhere for her to go, and yet, the thought of remaining here was unbearable. A sudden stir of motion caught her attention. She looked up just as a shadow fell across the sunlit ground. A lone rider on horseback paused at the edge of the steps. Dust swirled around the horse's hooves as the man dismounted, boots crunching softly against the earth. He was broad-shouldered, with a quiet presence that commanded attention without arrogance. His eyes, steady and clear, met hers with an unreadable expression. Alma flinched instinctively, unsure whether to trust or flee. But there was something about the stranger that held her in place, not a threat, not a claim, but an unspoken question, a silent offer of acknowledgement. He tilted his head slightly, as though giving her the space to speak, to reveal herself on her own terms. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows of the church steps, to escape the gaze of everyone and everything that had turned against her. Yet, in that instant, she realized she was no longer completely alone. Someone had noticed. Someone had come. Her heart beat unevenly in her chest, caught between hope and despair, and for the first time since the morning began, she dared to breathe. Cole's horse shifted beneath him, the animal snorting softly as it sensed the tension in the air. The rider's eyes never left the woman crouched behind the church steps, her figure small and fragile in the fading light. He had seen many things in his life: dust-choked trails, desperate travelers, men and women at their wits' end, but there was something different about her. She wasn't just lost, she was shattered, a delicate spirit bruised by the cruelty of others. He dismounted slowly, the boots of his worn leather creaking against the wooden boards. Dust clung to his coat, wind teasing the fringe, but his gaze remained steady, focused entirely on Alma. There was no hurry, no rush to solve her problems. Only presence, only patience. Alma flinched as he approached, pressing herself tighter against the cold stone of the church. She had expected anger, or scorn, or the disinterest that had marked every interaction of the day. Instead, she found calm, quiet, patient, and unwavering. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, measured, carrying the subtle authority of a man used to commanding attention without demanding it. Alma blinked rapidly, unsure if she should answer. The words lodged in her throat, tangled with fear and the memory of betrayal. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to gently, to be treated with concern rather than expectation or judgment. Cole took another careful step forward, hands relaxed at his sides. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he added. I don't like seeing folks in trouble." Something in that simple declaration softened her. The world had been unkind to her today. People had turned away, ignored her, laughed at her pain. And yet, here was a man who had paused his journey, who had ridden into town only to stop for someone he didn't even know. I wasn't invited to my own wedding," Alma whispered finally, voice trembling. The words were small, fragile, and yet they carried the weight of all the betrayal she had endured. Cole knelt slightly, keeping his distance but leaning in with care. "I see," he said softly, as if he understood more than the words alone could convey. "That's awful. I'm sorry." She swallowed hard, staring down at her hands. His presence was a strange comfort, steady and warm, like the first hint of sunlight after a stormy night. There was no judgment in his eyes, only awareness. And for the first time that day, Alma allowed herself to hope that perhaps she had not been entirely abandoned. Cole reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a thick blanket, tossing it gently toward her. It landed around her shoulders with a soft weight, the wool warm against the chill in the air. She hugged it around herself, fingers clutching at the folds, and felt a tiny spark of relief. "You're safe here," he said simply. "At least for now. Come on, let's get you somewhere out of sight." Alma nodded slowly, hesitant, but a spark of trust flickered in her eyes. For the first time in hours, perhaps days, she felt the possibility of escape from humiliation, from fear, from the relentless sting of rejection. Cole extended a hand, steady and patient. Alma placed her hand in his, the warmth of his grip steadying her wobbling courage. Together, they turned away from the church and the town, leaving whispers, judgment, and sorrow behind them. For the first time in a long while, Alma allowed herself to breathe. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, gold and amber under the setting sun. Alma walked beside Cole's horse, clutching the thick blanket he had offered, its warmth a fragile comfort against the chill of shame and the wind that tugged at her veil. Her heart still pounded from the sting of rejection, the memory of the empty church and the laughter of those who had abandoned her. Cole rode slowly beside her, the horse's hooves crunching softly against the dirt road. He said nothing at first, allowing silence to settle between them like a gentle blanket, not heavy, not demanding, just presence. Sometimes, silence could speak louder than words, and Alma felt the tension in her shoulders ease, just a fraction. Finally, she spoke, her voice quivering yet steadying itself with every word. I wasn't invited to my own wedding." Cole's expression softened, the lines of his face etched with understanding rather than judgment. "I can see that," he replied quietly, not needing to elaborate. His calm acknowledgement carried more weight than pity ever could. Alma glanced down at the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, gripping it as if it could shield her from the world. They said I wasn't the right kind of bride. That I didn't fit their expectations." Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard to keep the words from shattering entirely. I thought they wanted me there." Cole's eyes held hers steadily. There was no dismissal, no hasty comfort, just the patient weight of someone willing to listen. "Sometimes people can be cruel, especially when they don't understand their own hearts," he said. "That doesn't mean you're any less deserving of kindness or respect." Alma looked up at him, startled. No one had said words like that to her all day, or in weeks, perhaps months. Her chest tightened, not with despair, but with something unfamiliar, hope. Cole reached into his saddlebag again and pulled out a small bottle of water, handing it to her. "Here," he said simply. "Drink, keep your strength." She hesitated, then took it, the cool liquid running down her throat, a small reminder that the world could still offer simple kindness. Why are you helping me?" she asked, a whisper nearly lost in the wind. He shook his head slightly, a faint smile brushing his lips. "I don't need a reason beyond seeing someone in trouble. You're not asking for anything. You're just here. That's enough for me." Alma blinked, unsure if she could trust the sincerity, yet the way he spoke carried no pretense, no hidden agenda. For the first time that day, she felt the courage to meet another person's gaze without flinching. They walked together in silence for a few more moments, the prairie wide and unending around them. Alma's fingers absent-mindedly clutched the edges of her gown, now soiled and torn, and she realized that while she could not undo the day's humiliation, she could take the first step toward reclaiming herself. Cole finally nodded toward the horizon, where a faint plume of smoke hinted at a distant cabin. "There's a place not far from here. Safe, warm. You can rest, at least for a while." Alma hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," she said softly, not just for the promise of safety, but for the acknowledgement that she had been seen, that she mattered. Cole offered a small, reassuring smile. "Come on, then. Let's get you somewhere you belong, at least for tonight." And for the first time since the church doors had closed on her, Alma allowed herself to hope. The wind bit at Alma's cheeks as she climbed onto Cole's horse, her hands trembling around the reins he held steady for her. The prairie stretched endlessly ahead, bathed in the amber glow of the late afternoon sun, and for the first time that day, she felt the faint stirrings of something she hadn't dared to name: possibility. Cole swung into the saddle behind her, steady as always, his presence a quiet reassurance. "Hold on tight," he said softly, though his tone carried no rush, no urgency. "Just a simple truth. You are not alone." Alma exhaled, gripping the blanket that wrapped her shoulders, the coarse wool still warm from Cole's care. She hadn't expected kindness today. She had expected mockery, rejection, whispers, and judgment. But here, riding away from the small town that had turned its back on her, she found herself wondering if perhaps there was a place where she could breathe again, a place untouched by humiliation. The horse moved smoothly under her, hooves striking a steady rhythm on the dirt path. Dust swirled around their legs, catching the sunlight, turning the world into a soft haze of gold and shadow. Alma's heart thumped in time with the horse's steps, her thoughts a jumble of fear, relief, and cautious hope. She dared a glance behind her. The church, the town, the faces that had abandoned her, all faded in the distance, replaced by the rolling hills and open sky. Cole rode close, his eyes scanning the horizon, alert and watchful. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "Just hold on." Alma nodded, swallowing hard. Words seemed inadequate for the jumble of emotions inside her: shame, anger, grief, and the faintest spark of trust. Instead, she let herself absorb the feel of the wind against her face, the steady strength of the horse beneath her, and the quiet certainty of Cole riding behind her. The prairie around them was alive with motion. Birds flitted through the golden grasses, the distant call of cattle drifted from a hidden ranch, and the faint scent of sagebrush filled the air. Alma breathed deeply, letting the scents and sounds wash over her, grounding her in the present. She had been abandoned, yes, humiliated, yes, but she was still here. And she was moving forward. Cole tilted his head, his voice low and steady. "There's a small ranch a few miles from here. Quiet, safe. You can rest there for the night. I'll make sure you're comfortable." Alma's hands tightened slightly on the reins. Comfort was a foreign concept, almost alien after the day she'd endured. And yet, something in the cadence of Cole's voice, the unwavering calm in his eyes, made her believe it might be possible. As the miles stretched behind them, the shadows lengthened across the prairie, painting the world in soft oranges and deep purples. Alma's thoughts drifted to the future, to the uncertainty that lay ahead, and for the first time, she did not feel completely paralyzed by fear. She was leaving shame behind, riding towards something she could not yet name, but something that felt like hope. Cole nudged the horse gently forward, sensing her hesitation. "You're stronger than you think," he said, "and you won't have to face anything alone anymore." Alma allowed herself a small, tentative smile. For the first time since the morning began, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she could begin again. The small ranch emerged from the rolling hills like an oasis of calm, smoke curling lazily from the cabin's stone chimney and the soft clatter of horses in the corral greeting them as they approached. Alma felt a tentative pulse of hope stir in her chest. She had spent hours hiding behind church steps, racked by humiliation and despair, yet here she was, riding toward safety, toward warmth, toward the possibility of care rather than scorn. Cole guided the horse toward the cabin slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, giving Alma every opportunity to absorb the sight before them. The cabin was modest, built of weathered timber that had seen decades of sun and wind. A wooden fence enclosed the yard, horses grazing quietly on the golden grass. The scent of fresh hay mingled with the crisp air, a hint of domesticity and routine that felt foreign to Alma after the chaos of the town. She exhaled slowly, gripping the reins, her eyes wide as she took it all in. For the first time since she had been abandoned, she felt a sense of safety. The world did not feel threatening here. She could breathe, she could exist without fear of mockery or rejection. Cole dismounted with ease, moving to steady the horse while Alma clambered down, her dress brushing the earth. "Take your time," he said, his voice calm and unhurried. "You don't need to rush." Alma let the blanket slide from her shoulders and wrapped it tightly around herself, as much for comfort as warmth. She felt small beneath the wide sky, but the presence of the ranch, the steady rhythm of life, and the quiet strength of Cole beside her gave her the courage to step forward. They entered the yard, and Alma noticed the meticulous care evident in every detail. The fence posts were sturdy, the barn doors freshly oiled, and the horses' coats gleamed in the afternoon sun. Here, someone had worked with patience and pride. Here, the world had order, and she could feel herself grounding in that order, finding a rhythm she had long forgotten. Cole led her toward the cabin door, the steps creaking gently beneath their feet. "You'll have a room to yourself," he said. "Clean sheets, a fire if you want it. You can rest, eat, just be." Alma's lips pressed together, overwhelmed. Words were inadequate to express what she felt: relief, disbelief, gratitude, and the faintest glimmer of something warmer. She had expected judgment, but here was sanctuary instead. Here was a man who did not demand explanation, who did not scoff at her tears, who simply offered care. She looked at Cole, her eyes searching, hesitant, yet something unspoken passed between them. Trust, tentative but growing, fragile yet real. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, casting the yard in a soft, golden glow. Alma stepped toward the cabin, letting the quiet comfort wash over her, realizing she could finally let go, even if just for a moment. She could be human again, allowed to feel, allowed to rest. Cole followed her inside, closing the door gently behind them, the sounds of the prairie stretching quietly beyond. Alma inhaled the scent of wood smoke and warm blankets, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to believe that she might survive this heartbreak, and perhaps, in time, even heal. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, but inside, Alma had found a small piece of safety, a flicker of hope, and the promise that she was not entirely alone. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire in the stone hearth. Alma sat on a worn wooden chair, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, the warmth seeping slowly into her chilled bones. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grasses, but inside, there was only the steady glow of the hearth, a haven that felt almost unreal after the chaos and humiliation she had endured earlier that day. Cole moved around the cabin with the ease of someone accustomed to solitude and routine. He set a simple meal on the table: bread, cheese, and a small piece of smoked meat. "Eat," he said gently. "You need your strength." Alma hesitated, her hands resting in her lap. It was strange, almost foreign, to be treated with such consideration. The day had taught her that people could be cruel, that kindness was often conditional. Yet here, it was given freely, without expectation or judgment. She picked at the food, taking small, cautious bites, her gaze flicking to Cole. He didn't push her to speak, didn't attempt to pry. He simply sat across the table, eyes warm, patient. His presence alone was comforting, a silent acknowledgement that she was allowed to be broken and weary and still be worthy of care. After a few moments of quiet, Alma finally spoke, her voice low, hesitant. I don't know how to thank you." Cole tilted his head slightly, a small, understanding smile touching his lips. "You don't need to. You're here, and that's enough. That's thanks enough for me." Alma swallowed, emotions catching in her throat. She had spent so long hiding, pretending to be strong, pretending to belong. Yet now, in the warmth of the fire, she allowed herself to relax, to let the tension in her shoulders ebb. The tears came quietly, unbidden, and Cole didn't flinch. He simply handed her a clean cloth, his gesture gentle, wordless. I've never felt safe like this," Alma admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Not for a long time." Cole's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time you do," he said. "Safe doesn't mean nothing will ever hurt again. It just means you won't face it alone." Alma studied him, the weight of his words settling slowly in her chest. She realized that for the first time in days, she didn't have to hide from the world. She didn't have to carry the shame and rejection alone. She could rest, even if only for tonight, in the knowledge that someone cared, that someone saw her pain and chose to stay. The firelight flickered across their faces, casting warm shadows on the walls of the cabin. Alma took a deep breath, letting the scent of smoke and earth fill her senses. She allowed herself a small, tentative smile. Perhaps this was the beginning, not the end, of something new. Cole leaned back in his chair, glancing toward the fire, then back at her. "Rest now," he said softly. "Tomorrow is a new day, and you won't have to face it alone." Alma nodded, the blanket tightening around her shoulders. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the fire, the quiet of the cabin, and the presence of the man who had saved her soothe the ache in her chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, Alma felt a spark of hope, fragile, tentative, yet real. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could start again. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the small cabin windows, spilling across the worn wooden floor and casting the room in a gentle golden glow. Alma stirred beneath her blanket, the warmth of the fire from the night before still lingering in her bones. She took a deep breath, the smell of smoke and fresh hay drifting through the open door, and felt the quiet reassurance of the ranch settle around her. Cole was already moving about, tending to the horses in the corral. The rhythmic clatter of hooves, the soft nicker of animals greeting him, and the creak of leather bridles created a steady, grounding rhythm. Alma watched from the doorway for a moment, hesitant but drawn by the calm efficiency of his movements. For days, perhaps weeks, she had felt adrift, untethered, but here, she felt a faint pulse of belonging. Cole noticed her presence and smiled lightly, a simple acknowledgement that made her chest tighten with something she couldn't yet name. "Morning," he said, voice quiet but steady. "We've got chores to do if you're up for it." Alma nodded, unsure how to respond. Chores had once been mundane, even burdensome, but here, they seemed different. They were a way to claim her place, a way to be part of something steady and real after the tumult of the past days. Cole handed her a small bundle of feed for the horses. "Start with these, just a little at a time. You'll get the hang of it." Her fingers brushed against the coarse sacks of grain, the texture grounding her. She moved slowly, cautiously, unsure of how much she could do without faltering, but Cole's calm patience encouraged her. He didn't rush her, didn't hover. He simply offered support, steady and unspoken, like the horizon itself. As Alma poured the feed into the troughs, she noticed the horse's gentle eyes watching her. Duke, the stallion that had carried her to the ranch, nuzzled her hand with an almost knowing gentleness. A tiny smile tugged at her lips. Here, she realized, there were no judgments, no whispers, only quiet companionship, and a rhythm she could match with her own hands and heart. Cole joined her, sweeping hay into the stall with practiced ease. "Not bad," he said, a hint of approval in his voice that made her cheeks warm. "You'll be good at this in no time." Alma laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in days. The sound was light, fragile, yet it carried a sense of renewal. It was a small spark, but it grew as they worked together, side by side. Each task, each simple movement, became a way for her to reclaim herself, piece by piece. By the time the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard, Alma felt an unfamiliar sense of pride. She had helped, contributed, and been trusted. More than that, she had discovered a small but profound truth: she was capable, resilient, and beginning to trust herself again. Cole caught her glance and nodded, a silent acknowledgement that passed between them like a quiet promise. Alma realized that trust could grow in small, steady increments, nurtured by patience and care, and that perhaps she could begin to imagine a future that included safety, hope, and maybe even joy. The prairie stretched wide before them, golden and unbroken, and Alma felt the first stirrings of a new dawn not just in the sky, but in her own heart. By midday, the ranch had settled into a comfortable rhythm, the chores moving like the steady heartbeat of life. Alma, though still cautious and tentative, had found her footing. She carried buckets of water, swept the barn floor, and fed the horses with a careful attention that surprised even herself. The work grounded her, but it was Cole's presence, patient, watchful, and spoken in its encouragement, that began to lift the weight of shame from her shoulders. Cole had been repairing a fence when a plank snapped beneath his hands, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. Alma glanced up just in time to see him stumble, a grunt escaping his lips as he nearly lost his balance. Without thinking, she stepped forward, reaching to steady him. "Careful," she exclaimed, her voice catching between concern and amusement. Cole's eyes met hers, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Well, aren't you quick on your feet?" he said, the corners of his mouth tugging into the faintest of smiles. Alma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but the tension broke into a nervous laugh. "I guess I am," she admitted, feeling a rare lightness in her chest. Cole shook his head, chuckling softly. "I didn't expect that from someone who spent the morning burying themselves in work like a ghost. You've got a fire in you." Alma laughed again, louder this time, and the sound carried across the yard, startling a flock of birds from a nearby tree. It felt foreign, exhilarating, and utterly freeing. For days she had carried only sorrow, shame, and fear, Yet here, in the wide open sunlight and the safety of the ranch, she discovered something she had almost forgotten. Joy. Cole leaned against the fence, watching her with a quiet amusement. "I think the horses approve of your energy, too," he said. One of them, a brown mare, nuzzled Alma's shoulder, her soft muzzle brushing against the folds of the blanket. Alma laughed, swatting at the gentle intruder, feeling the weight of tension in her body dissolve just a little more. The moments of laughter flowed naturally, unforced, like water finding its way around stones in a stream. Alma realized that it wasn't just amusement, it was trust, comfort, and a sense of connection that she hadn't thought possible in weeks. Cole straightened and offered a hand to help her step down from the fence where she had been perched, dusting hay from her skirts. Alma took it, and their fingers brushed briefly. The contact was simple, yet it carried a weight of unspoken understanding, safety, respect, and something else, a budding sense of closeness neither dared name aloud. The sun climbed higher, the prairie stretching wide and golden around them. Alma leaned against the fence, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, unneeded in the warmth of the day. Her laughter subsided into a soft smile, one that lingered long after the chuckles faded. Cole watched her, feeling a quiet shift in the air between them. The shared laughter had done more than break the ice, it had begun to thaw the frost around Alma's heart. In that moment, both knew that what had begun with fear and despair was now evolving into something new, tentative, fragile, and yet full of promise. And in the quiet expanse of the prairie, with the horses grazing and the wind carrying the scent of sage and grass, Alma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could trust Joy again. The prairie was quiet in the late afternoon, the golden light spilling across the hills in soft, forgiving waves. Alma stood by the cabin's fence, her hands gripping the weathered wood as she gazed toward the distant town that had cast her aside. Her wedding dress, now long packed away, felt like a memory she could almost forget, yet the sting of abandonment lingered like a ghost she could not shake. Cole approached quietly, his footsteps muffled by the grass. He leaned against the fence beside her, not pressing for words, simply offering the presence that had become her anchor in this new world. Alma did not turn immediately, the tension in her shoulders remained, a silent testimony to the fear and humiliation that had followed her like shadows. Finally, she exhaled, her voice trembling. "I keep thinking about them. About how they laughed, how they said I wasn't enough. How easy it was for them to erase me." Cole nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon rather than hers. "It was cruel," he said softly. "And it was unfair. But their cruelty doesn't define you, Alma. You define you." Her gaze shifted toward him, searching, as though trying to gauge the truth in his words. How do you just move on?" Cole smiled faintly, a hint of something sad in his expression. "You don't forget, you don't erase the pain. But you can choose not to let it chain you. You can let the past teach you, not trap you." Alma swallowed hard, the lump in her throat heavy. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she admitted. "After everything, after being abandoned, I feel like a stranger to myself." Cole's hand brushed gently against hers, steadying, grounding. "Then start here," he said quietly. "Start with today, with what you can control. The past is a shadow. You're still in the sunlight if you choose to be." For a long moment, Alma considered his words, the wind tugging at her hair, carrying with it the sense of grass and smoke and freedom. Slowly, she let herself inhale deeply, letting the tension in her shoulders ease. The memory of the church, the whispers, the laughter, they remained, but they no longer held dominion over her. Cole leaned back against the fence, his presence patient and unwavering. Alma turned to him finally, a tentative hope flickering in her eyes. "And if I fail?" "You won't," he said firmly. "Not because I'll stop you, but because you're stronger than you think. You've made it this far. You're still standing. That counts for something." A small smile, fragile but real, tugged at Alma's lips. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that she could face her past without being consumed by it. That she could step into a new life without fear of judgment or rejection. The sun dipped lower, painting the prairie in hues of orange and purple. Alma inhaled the evening air, letting it fill her lungs, filling her with resolve. The past would not vanish entirely, but it no longer had the power to define her. Cole glanced at her, a quiet pride reflected in his eyes. "Ready to leave the shadows behind?" he asked gently. Alma nodded, her gaze steady and unwavering. For the first time in a long while, she believed that she could, and would, step forward, free from the chains of yesterday. And together, they turned toward the cabin, toward safety, toward hope, toward a future that waited quietly in the fading light. The morning sun spilled across the prairie in a golden haze, brushing the hills with light and painting long shadows behind the cabin. Alma stood at the edge of the yard, her hair loose around her shoulders, the blanket she had clutched so tightly days before now folded neatly in the corner. She breathed deeply, the scent of sagebrush, earth, and the faint warmth of the horses filling her senses. The ranch was alive with the quiet rhythm of life, the distant clatter of hooves, the low nicker of Duke as he grazed, and the whisper of the wind across the open plains. Cole approached, riding slowly, his posture calm and assured. His eyes met hers, and for a long moment, words were unnecessary. The connection they had forged through shared hardship, quiet gestures, and laughter lingered between them like the first light of dawn. "You ready?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the same gentle authority that had guided her since she had arrived. Alma nodded, gripping the reins as she swung herself onto the horse beside him. She felt the animal beneath her, steady and sure, and felt the pulse of the land under her boots. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she was moving forward, not away from something, but toward something she had not dared to imagine. They rode together across the prairie, the wind tugging at their clothes and hair, the sun warming their backs. Alma's chest felt lighter with every step, the weight of shame, betrayal, and fear lifting like morning mist under the sun. Behind them, the town receded into memory, irrelevant and distant. Before them, the horizon stretched endlessly, filled with promise and possibility. Cole glanced at her, his gaze soft but unwavering. "It's a new day," he said, "and it's yours to shape." Alma's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "I think I can do that," she whispered, the words carrying both resolve and wonder. "I think I finally can." The horses moved in steady rhythm, hooves striking the earth like a heartbeat, echoing the steadiness that now coursed through Alma's own veins. She thought of the nights by the fire, the shared laughter, the quiet conversations, and the small acts of care that had built the fragile trust between them. Every moment had led to this, to freedom from the past, and the first tentative steps into a future defined by choice, safety, and hope. Cole's hand brushed hers briefly, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had traveled together. Alma squeezed it lightly, not needing words to convey what the gesture meant. Trust, gratitude, and perhaps something deeper, something like the first whisper of love. As the sun climbed higher, painting the prairie in vibrant golds and greens, Alma lifted her gaze, taking in the vast, open land. For the first time, she felt the possibilities stretching before her like the horizon itself, wide, open, and unbound. She was no longer defined by loss, abandonment, or fear. She was alive, and she had been given the gift of a second chance. Cole nudged his horse gently forward, and Alma followed, side by side. Together, they rode across the rolling plains, the wind carrying the sound of their quiet laughter and the faint promise of new beginnings. And in that golden light, Alma allowed herself to believe fully. The past could not hold her, the future was hers to embrace, and hope, fragile, radiant, unstoppable, could finally lead her home.